In order to train Grok, Elon Musk set up a supercomputer called Colossus in the Memphis, Tennessee area, completely hijacked local democratic processes to put it up as quickly as possible and start powering it with unlicensed methane gas turbines that are now pummeling that area with huge amounts of air pollution.
These are the gas turbines fueling the supercomputer they call Colossus. They emit hazardous pollutants like formaldehyde and nitrogen oxides.
These companies don't actually care about preserving people's right to even clean air.
These people say AI will save humanity, but at the same time, they are racing to destroy the planet, pollute our water, and fill the air with toxic gas. Karen Howe is a best-selling author. She exposes the truth about AI companies.
These data centers need fresh water to cool because if they used any other kind of water, it would corrode the equipment, it would lead to bacterial growth. And so most often these data centers actually use public drinking water. There are many, many communities, but they do not have sufficient drinking water even for people. And I went to Montevideo, Uruguay to speak with people about a historic level of drought that they were experiencing, where the Montevideo government literally did not have enough water to put into the public drinking water supply. So they were mixing toxic wastewater in just so people could have something come out of their taps when they opened them. And for people that were too poor to buy bottled water, that is what they were drinking. And women were having higher rates of miscarriages. Elderly were having an exacerbation or an inflammation of their chronic diseases. And in the middle of that, Google proposed to build a data center that would use more drinking water. These data centers have to run 24/7. They cannot run on renewable energy. The sun and the wind don't blow and shine all the time. And Altman even said in his Senate testimony, this will most likely be serviced by natural gas. And then of course he says, but in the long term, we'll figure out fusion. But the AI industry always does the same dance of there are real things happening now with concrete evidence that you can point to of harms. And then they wave a wand of, but in the future they will be fixed by something that we don't actually have evidence will ever happen. And it's not just climate. We are also facing a huge freshwater crisis globally now. There are many communities around the world that now have trouble accessing drinking water. So is the US. The southwestern US, which has become a huge hub of these data centers, is facing the worst drought in 1,000 years, according to research from Nature. Like in Colombia, I was literally visiting and tried to go to the National Museum in Bogota, and the National Museum was literally shut down because they could not service water to the bathrooms. And in Uruguay, the government is mixing toxic chemical water into the drinking water supply because they just need something to feed the taps so that when people open their taps, something comes out. They're all pursuing the same thing, which is large language models, scale, and growth at all costs. They are just running and racing, and they're not as concerned anymore about the negative ripple effects they can cause. And that's why I think we've reached the moment where we can no longer talk about these as companies and we have to talk about them as empires, is the amount of data that they need has completely eclipsed the amount of data that social media companies took from us. I mean, Meta literally has 4 billion users' data. But even then, the New York Times reported last year that Meta was having conversations about, we don't have enough data. We need to potentially buy Simon & Schuster. We need to potentially ignore all the data privacy rules that we set up after Cambridge Analytica and just acquire more and more and more, because with the current repository of data that we have, the 4 billion users, we cannot outcompete OpenAI. That is an order of magnitude, maybe multiple orders of magnitude more data that we're talking about.
A small thing you can do in your daily life is to reject browser cookies whenever you see them.
One of my favorite things about visiting the UK and EU as an American that has no federal data privacy law to protect me is to reject those cookies every single web page that I encounter. That is me reclaiming ownership over my data and not allowing those companies to then feed that into their models. Here's why you should stop giving all of your data to these companies. You're ceding a lot of control and agency over your life without actually getting much in return. Originally, the bargain of giving data to companies is they will give you something in return. But these companies have reached empire status where they don't actually have to give you anything in return anymore. They have gotten so much economic and political leverage, they can start acting in their self-interest with basically no consequence. Like Altman has said, AGI should solve poverty. You know, all your economic problems go away. It's going to solve climate change. It's going to wave the wand and wipe away poverty. He said in a blog, we are now entering the intelligence age, and the things that will happen in this age are so profoundly utopic that we can't even imagine. Even curing cancer and solving climate change is not sufficient to describe the sheer orders of magnitude of abundance and prosperity and goodness that is going to come. They alone are the ones that have the scientific and moral clarity to control our progression into that future. You don't believe in a God that is higher than you. You believe you are creating the God. This is what they are doing. This is their purpose, especially for people in the doomer category, the people who believe AGI will kill humanity. I interviewed people who had very sincere emotional reactions when talking to me about the possibility that this could happen. Their voices quivering, viscerally feeling that this is a possibility.
Many experts genuinely believe that this reckless race toward AGI will lead to our extinction.
AGI is whatever the companies need it to be. If they want to sell you a convenient product, they are going to talk about AGI as the movie Her. This is going to make your life so amazing. It's an operating system for your life. If they want to talk to Congress to ward off regulation, AGI is suddenly this mythical object that will solve climate change and cure cancer. Analyzing 1,000 years of technology history, there is a consistent pattern that we see in every technology revolution that the elites are the ones that have the money, the influence, the power to actually rally enough resources around creating certain new technologies, but it's also created in their image. And consistently, there's a lot of fallout that comes from that, where people who do not live like them, who do not look like them, end up being harmed. The thing that Silicon Valley will always tell you is that is justification for why this technology revolution is happening in the same way. And to me, it's like, wait a minute, most of these technology revolutions that have happened in the last 1,000 years were when we didn't have human rights in existence. A feature of empire is they're made to feel inevitable. And that is part of their power. You can't stop it, it's an unstoppable force. But the thing is, every empire has fallen in history. These data centers often come in without any transparency. Like Meta built a data center in New Mexico under a shell company name called Greater Kudu LLC. And it wasn't until the deal was done that they went, surprise, it's Meta. And so all of these residents are rising up being like, we need more transparency. We need you to guarantee that either if you bring in a data center, you give us jobs, or you tell us that you're not going to use above a certain amount of water, a certain amount of energy, or you don't come at all. And so I think we have to sort of remember that we have a right to elect officials that protect our life-sustaining water. When you talk about the fashion industry, I mean, there were some serious environmental and labor harms coming out of the fashion industry. There was such a huge movement among consumers of, wait a minute, we don't want to buy clothes that are created in buildings that are collapsing on people and leaving them dead. We want to buy sustainable, ethically sourced clothes where workers are paid what they're actually, the value that they create. And it actually created entirely new markets for sustainable fashion. So the solution at the time wasn't like no one wear any clothes. The solution was to shore up the supply chain and create enough pressure that there are new markets born from the consumer demand. People wanted better. So there was a McKinsey report that recently projected that based on the current pace of data center and supercomputer expansion for the development, we would need to add around half to 1.2 times the amount of energy consumed in the UK annually to the global grid in the next 5 years. And most of that will be serviced by fossil fuels. Not only are these companies really corporate empires, but also that if we allow them to be unfettered in their access to resources and unfettered in their expansion, they will ultimately erode democracy. Like, that is the greatest threat of their behaviors. And what XAI is doing is a perfect example of, at the smallest level, these companies are entering into communities and completely hijacking existing laws, existing regulations, existing democratic processes to build the infrastructure for their expansion. And we're seeing this hijacking of the democratic process at every level, the smallest local levels all the way to the international level. It is a huge, risky bargain. It's not just being taken on by these VCs, it's actually being taken on by the entire economy, because the money that these investors are investing comes from like university endowments and things like that. So if the bubble pops, it doesn't just pop for Silicon Valley, it actually will have ripple effects across the global economy. Sam Altman writing a blog post in 2013 that says, successful people build companies, more successful people build countries, the most successful people build religions. And it turns out building a company is the easiest way to do so. I went to school with some of the executives at OpenAI. For me, I don't find these figures to be towering or magical. It instilled in me this understanding that technology is always a product of human choices. And if you give a small group of those people too much power to develop technologies that will affect billions of people's lives, inevitably that is structurally unsound. We should not be allowing small groups of individuals to concentrate such profound influence on society. Like, there are projections that say that at the current pace of data center development to support these AI ambitions, in 5 years, at the end of the decade, we will need to slap the equivalent of 2 to 6 Californias of energy demand onto the global grid. The majority of it will be serviced by fossil fuels. They also have sustainability reports where they talk about the water and carbon and things like that. And they also massage that data a lot to make it seem better than it actually is. They see different territories as different types of resources. We're going to go here and acquire the labor. We're going to go here and acquire the land. We're going to go here and acquire the minerals. I mean, that's literally how they talk. When I was talking with some OpenAI researchers about their data center expansion, there was one OpenAI employee who said, we're running out of land and water. We're just trying to look at the whole world and see where else we can place these things. Land without earthquakes, without floods, without tornadoes, hurricanes, all these natural disasters, and can deliver massive amounts of energy to a single point. It always ends up in economically vulnerable communities, because those are the communities that often actually opt in to the data center development initially, because they are not informed about what it will ultimately cost them and for how long. And so I spoke with this one Arizona legislator who said, I didn't know it had to use fresh water. Arizona is a desert territory. There's a very, very stringent budget on fresh water. And after that legislator found out, she was like, I would have never voted for having this data center in. But the problem is the only people that they rely on for the information about what the impact of this is going to be are the companies. And all the companies ever say is, we're going to invest millions of dollars. We're going to create a bunch of construction jobs up front, and it's going to be great for your economy. People think that you need colossal data centers to build AI systems. You actually do not. This is specifically the approach that OpenAI decided to take, but actually the trend within the AI research community was going the opposite direction towards tiny AI systems. And there was all this really interesting research looking into how you could have a couple hundred images to create highly performant AI systems, or AI systems trained on your mobile device. OpenAI took an approach that is now using hundreds of thousands of computer chips to train a single system. And those hundreds of thousands of computer chips now are consuming, city loads of energy. Stable diffusion was specifically developed by an academic in Europe who was really pissed that the AI companies like OpenAI were taking a scaling approach to image generation. He was like, this is literally wholly unnecessary, and they're spending thousands of chips, all of this energy to produce DALL-E. He ended up producing Stable Diffusion with a couple hundred chips. Arguably, it was actually an even better model than DALL-E, but even knowing that latent diffusion existed, OpenAI continued to develop DALL-E with these massive scaling approaches, and it wasn't until later that they then adopted the cheaper version. Most AI experts today are employed by these companies, and this is basically the equivalent of if most climate scientists were being bankrolled by oil and gas companies. Now that they know that they can use these techniques to make their models more efficient, they're still not really doing it. Because if you continue to pursue a scaling approach and you're the only one with all of the AI experts in the world, you persuade people into believing this is the only path, and therefore you continue to monopolize this technology because it locks out anyone else from playing that game. And also because path dependence, like these companies are actually not that nimble, they end up the way that they organize themselves, it's not so easy for them to just like immediately swap to a different approach. They end up putting in motion all of the resources, all of the training runs, so on and so forth.
This next part is interesting. She talks about the level of exploitation that is happening to regular people.
In Kenya, for example, I was talking with workers that are contracted by these companies to do some of the worst work in the AI supply chain. Hey, label all of these worst, like text from the worst parts of the internet, read that day in and day out, label it into a detailed taxonomy. And those workers, like all content moderators, ended up psychologically devastated. And not only them, because these individuals are part of communities. There are people that depend on them. And I write about a man named Mofat Okinye, who was one of the Kenyan workers contracted by OpenAI, where he completely changed his personality, and his wife had no idea what was going on because he had no way to tell her, oh, I'm reading sex content all day. And one day she texts him and says, I would want fish for dinner. He goes out, buys 3 fish, one for him, one for her daughter, his stepdaughter, who he loved and adored and called his baby girl. And when he shows up back home, they've left completely. All their stuff is gone. And his wife texts him, you've changed. I don't know the man you are anymore. And she never comes back.
There's no moral justification for why those workers whose contribution is critical to the functioning of these technologies and critical to the popularity of products like ChatGPT are paid pennies when the people working within the companies can easily get $1 million compensation packages. The only justification is an ideological one, which is that there are some people born into this world superior and others who are inferior, and the superior people have a right to subjugate the inferior ones.
She talks about how similar the AI companies today to the empires of the past.
When you think about the very long history of European colonialism and the way that empires of old operated, there were several different features for empires of old. One was they laid claim to resources that were not their own, and they designed rules that made it seem like they were their resources. You know, the Spanish conquistadors showed up in the Americas and were like, actually, based on our laws, we own this land and these minerals and these resources. They would exploit a lot of labor around the world, meaning they didn't pay workers, they paid them very little to continue building up and fortifying the empire. They competed with one another. So there was this aggressive race of, we, the French Empire, are better than the British Empire. We, the British Empire, are better than the Dutch Empire. And we need to continue to relentlessly race and be number one because we're the ones that have the right civilizing mission to bring modernity and progress to all of humanity. And that is literally what is happening now with AI companies, where they extract a lot of resources, lay claim to a lot of resources that are not their own, but they're trying to position it such that it seems like if you give us all of the resources, all of the capital, and just close your eyes to the enormous environmental, social, and labor impacts all around the world, we will eventually bring modernity and progress to all of humanity. And we are seeing that play out in real time, where OpenAI and all of these empires of AI, they are gaining so much economic and political leverage in the US and around the world. They basically can act in their self-interest with no material consequence to themselves anymore. I ended up going to Chile, to the Atacama Desert. It has long dealt with all kinds of extraction, but that extraction has really accelerated because of AI. They have a lot of copper, and lithium is also needed in data centers. And there are indigenous peoples there that are literally being displaced and literally experiencing colonialism right now. It is not a thing of the past for them. They are having their lands taken. They are having their economic opportunity taken. They said to me when I was interviewing the indigenous communities there, we have always been told these ideas about this will bring everyone into the future. Are you sure it's everyone? Like, who is this bringing into the future? We don't have any checks on these companies and how they are going to design their AI models and what kinds of values they use this vehicle to ferry out into the world. There are many types of AI technologies that can be profoundly beneficial, but the type that Silicon Valley has decided to invest in, which is these colossal models that they brand as general everything machines, is not the path that we should be focused on. The things that I think can be transformative are smaller, attack-specific problems that we need that lend themselves to the strengths of AI. So an example, DeepMind created AlphaFold to solve the protein folding problem. That has nothing to do with large language models. It has nothing to do with growth at all costs mentality. It was a very specific problem. Let's try and do this extremely computationally intensive task that we previously didn't have the computational software for. I'm also talking about AI like AI that can help integrate more renewables into the grid. This is something that we really desperately need to do. Renewable energy is a very difficult to predict source. Sometimes the sun shines, sometimes the wind blows, and sometimes they don't. AI systems are incredibly effective at solving optimization problems. And so there's all of these interesting problems in society that AI does naturally lend itself to, but I think the way that we can get broad-based benefit from AI technologies is by unwinding this scale and growth at all costs mentality back towards let's figure out what are the specific problems that we need and then develop well-scoped AI systems to tackle that very specific problem where there are people who genuinely believe that they are building God. Advance, and grow without recognition of what's happening in the present with all of the externalities that cause. There's a supply chain for AI development. These companies need a lot of data. They need a lot of computational resources. And if you are to chip away at each of these, they will be forced to not continue this all-consuming path of AI development. We've also seen the way that artists have used tools like glaze and nightshade, which is a thing that you can add a bit of a filter that the human eye can't see on your artwork when you put it online in a portfolio. But when the AI model tries to train on it, it starts to break down the AI model. So there's all of these forms of protest that are bubbling up.
Chilean water activists who pushed back against a Google data center project for so long that they've stalled that project now for 5 years. And they forced Google to come to the table and the Chilean government to come to the table. And now these residents are invited to comment every time there's a data center development proposal.
Demand more transparency around data centers that enter their communities and have ground rules around what kind of resources they can take, whether it's energy or water, or whether the data center should be there at all. We can't really rely on a company or a board that is tiny to represent the interests of all of humanity. If we can all just remember that we actually do have agency, and if we just remember that we have agency in all of these things, and we continue to assert what we want out of this technology and what the ground rules are, I think we will get to a much, much better future.